Today we're going to talk about the differences between academic writing and creative writing. Academic writing is ultimately a conversation. People who read a novel just want you to tell them a good story. Writing is writing, and there are certain skills that work for both. These are the two most important things, and your writing routine is what helps you create that habit. It all started as an academic writer. It all transferred over. Hello, and welcome to a new video. Welcome if you're new here. Hi, I'm Andrea. I'm a full-time university writing instructor and a part-time content creator and indie author. Welcome back if you're one of my lovely returning friends. It is great to have you all here. Welcome to a new Friday bonus video, the first one for March, and welcome to a writing video. And this is going to be a little bit different from other writing related videos I feel like I've done. This is a topic I've been wanting to talk about for a while. Today we're going to talk about the differences between academic writing and creative writing. And spoiler, they're not as different as you might think. I get asked this question a lot, or varieties of this question. What's the difference between academic writing and creative writing? Which do I prefer? How did I get into one or the other? So as a full-time writing instructor, I do have a PhD in rhetoric and writing. So I have studied writing like from a theoretical and pedagogical standpoint. I've done a lot of academic writing, but now I'm an indie author and I have written and published 8 novels. I've written more than I have published. So I think I've written 10 full drafts? No, 11. I've written 11 drafts. 2 that are completed and just are not on the publishing schedule. 1 that is completed and will be the next book to be published this year. So I've done a lot of creative writing now in just the last several years or so, but I feel like there's a lot of academics who would like to write novels but aren't sure if they can. Spoiler, you can. We'll talk about that. There's also a lot of people who are going to university for the first time, or they're going into grad school. Creative writing is a hobby. It's something they enjoy, but now they're facing a whole new genre of writing with academic writing, and there can be some nerves there. So whether you're an academic wanting to do creative writing, a creative writer who's now going to be doing some academic writing, someone who's just generally interested in writing and just wants to know a little bit more about different types of writing, or someone who just is curious and likes to listen to me ramble on about random topics, hopefully this video will be interesting to you. So I do have my journal and I've got some notes jotted down on this topic. We'll just dive on in. So the differences between academic writing and creative writing. I think it's important to kind of establish what are we talking about when we say academic writing or creative writing. It's fairly self-explanatory, but we're just going to spend a minute or two or more on this topic. So academic writing, nonfiction, that's the biggest difference right there. The main purpose is to inform or educate or perhaps persuade. You are typically working with a lot of facts and existing arguments on the topic. So you're doing a lot of data collection or research, then you're synthesizing that data and or research, and then you're adding something new to the conversation. Academic writing, and this is something I teach my undergraduate students, and this is something that I have learned throughout all of my academic studies, academic writing is ultimately a conversation. Any kind of essay that you're writing, research paper you're doing, from your undergraduate work all the way up through your master's thesis, your PhD dissertation, all of that research is participating in a conversation about that topic of study. So for me, as a scholar of rhetoric and composition, everything I was reading and writing was somehow adding to this conversation about rhetoric and writing and how these things function in society, and then more specifically within that, the specific areas of rhetoric that I was working on. So like my PhD dissertation was in broadly fashion studies, material culture, women's rhetoric and feminist rhetoric, things like that. So my research was building on all of the conversations, research papers that have been done on that topic, and adding to that conversation with my dissertation. So I think the biggest metaphor for academic writing is that idea of participating in a conversation. You're listening to what other people have to say, and then you're adding your own thoughts. And so ultimately, your audience are other people in your field of study who are interested in the topic that you are reading. And your purpose is to inform, educate, and possibly persuade that audience to the argument that you are making. The other big thing about academic writing is you are making some sort of argument or claim about your topic that you are then adding into the existing conversation on that topic. Creative writing, it's fiction. It's all made up. There really is no right or wrong. In academic writing, there is no right or wrong either, sort of. There's only not being persuasive enough, or not backing up your claims strongly enough, not having enough research to back up the claims that you are trying to make. With academic writing, it's not that there's a right or wrong as much as you don't have the data, the evidence, the research to back up what you're saying. With creative writing, there really are no barriers. There are no limits. You can write whatever you want. Similar to academic writing, you can do that poorly. You can do that in such a way that the audience doesn't go on that journey with you, but ultimately you make up the rules. You make up the story, the characters, the plot, the world that your story is set in. And if you do all of that correctly, you can have a world where the sky is green and the grass is red and where people can fly. You just have to make sure you establish all of those rules and that makes sense throughout the plot. So creative writing, there's a lot more flexibility in what you're writing. And your purpose ultimately is to entertain. So where academic writing, the purpose is to inform. For creative writing, the purpose is to entertain. People who read a novel just want you to tell them a good story. That's really all they want. So ultimately, these two types of writing aren't that different. Writing is writing. Whether it's academic writing or creative writing, writing is writing. And there are certain skills that work for both. And ultimately, and this is the biggest thing I try to teach my students, my undergrad students, every single semester, and I swear only a fraction of them seem to actually get it, the joys and sorrows of teaching a required class. Sometimes they're just not ready for the wisdom that I try to instill in them. Ultimately, every act of writing is about audience and purpose. These are the two most important things. Even if the audience is yourself and the purpose is to journal your thoughts and it's never going to be read by anyone else, that is still an audience that you are writing to and a purpose you are trying to achieve. So really, I mean, prove me wrong in the comments, but every act of writing is ultimately going to have an audience and a purpose. And then within that, your audience, you're writing towards an audience and purpose, you then have to abide by certain genre rules. So with academic writing, depending on which type of academic writing you're doing, what kind of essay you're doing, what field you're writing in, what discipline you're writing in, that's going to tweak your genre a bit. And then within creative writing, whether you're writing romance, sci-fi, fantasy, thrillers, mysteries, cozy mysteries, because then there's subgenres, and the readers are going to have different expectations for all of that. So those are kind of the main differences, and as I hope you've been able to see, they're really not that different. Skills that are strengths for both. I think this is something that when you are moving from one into the other, you can feel like, I don't know what I'm doing. I have no skills in this particular area. So when you have a lot of experience in academic writing and then you move into creative writing, it feels so different. I speak from experience, and you can feel like nothing that I can apply to academic writing applies to creative writing. And conversely, when you are so used to having the freedom and the flexibility of creative writing, if you then are trying to do some academic writing, you can feel like you're out of your depth and you don't know what you're doing. But because they're not that different, you probably already have skills that work in both. So, creative problem solving. Both types of writing need a certain amount of creative problem solving. Being able to visualize the big picture and understand what you are writing total. So whether that's visualizing your whole story for your novel or visualizing your whole main argument for your academic paper, being able to understand what your core research questions and your core outcome for your academic paper are, as well as being able to visualize what journey your main character is going to go on, being able to visualize that at the start and have that continue to kind of solidify as you go through the writing process, that's a skill that's relevant to both. And that's a skill that if you have experience in one type of writing, you already have that skill probably, and it will translate to the other. Being able to understand your audience. As a creative writer, if you already have a strong understanding of genre and audience expectations, that's going to apply to academic writing. And if you already have experience in academic writing and you're used to writing towards a specific academic audience, you're already going to have a basic understanding of audience and genre and expectations. That transfers across both types. Being able to anticipate what their expectations are is also really important. So the more you get into whichever type of writing you're doing, the more you will understand what your audience is expecting. When you're first starting as a romance writer, you might not understand what the romance audience really wants. This is where reading other examples of that genre are really important. The more romance novels you read, the more you're going to understand what the typical genre conventions are. It's the same thing for academic writing. The more academic articles and essays and books that you read, particularly in your field of study, the more you are going to understand what the basic genre conventions are for academic writing, what the basic conventions and audience expectations are for your particular genre of academic writing, and that is going to improve your academic writing. And those are skills that then transfer between both types of writing. And this is why the advice I give to other creative writers to read widely within the genre that you write, but also to read broadly across other genres, also applies to academic writing. Read a lot of articles directly related to your field of study. So as a scholar of fashion and feminism and material culture, I read a lot of articles on fashion studies, feminism and rhetoric, and material culture. But then throughout my PhD, I was also reading a lot on memory studies and rhetoric of place and space and other different historical rhetorics, a lot of composition, theories of composition, a lot of digital rhetoric, and then a lot of like heavy theory like Foucault. And I don't recommend reading Foucault, but again, as an academic, whatever your field is, if there's these like really heavy theorists that are related to your field, so reading some of these more heavy, dense theorists is also going to be really helpful, because it's going to be painful, but it's going to give you even more ideas of how writing can be done. So reading widely within your genre, your academic genre, and reading broadly across academic genres is also important. So that advice works for both as well. So the more you read within and around your genre, the more you're going to understand what your audience is going to expect. You're also going to understand what the basic rules are and when and where and how you can get away with breaking those rules. Both are long form writing. Academic and creative writing both deal with long form writing, which means you need to be able to sustain your interest in your topic. So whether that's in sustaining interest in your research topic and your research focus and your research questions and what you're doing and what you're trying to answer in your research paper, it's also the same with your novel. Sustaining interest in your characters, in your plot, in your main story, the main story arc, plot arc, and that you're not getting bored by the story you're telling. In both cases, if you get bored by what you're writing, your reader is going to get bored as well. So both require an ability to work on a long-form, long-term project and maintain interest in that project over that long term. And so for both types of writing, discipline, consistency, and good habits and good routines are really important. My writing routine that I still use to a certain extent as a creative writer, that writing routine started as an academic writer. So the biggest piece of advice that my PhD dissertation chair gave me, my advisor that she gave me, was to work on my project every day for 2 hours. And I didn't have to work on it for longer than that, but at least 2 hours. More if I felt like it and could manage it, but at least 2 hours. That was her recommendation, Monday through Friday. And so this is something that I kept up with my fiction writing. So I can't spend 2 hours. I could do 2 hours for my PhD dissertation because that was essentially my job. Throughout my PhD, I was a full-time grad student and I taught part-time for my university on the side, but my PhD research was my main job, and I was very fortunate to be in a situation where I didn't have to work a separate full-time job on top of writing my PhD. I know people who do, and it is very, very difficult. So working on my dissertation, that was my main job. So I could definitely allocate 2 hours to sit down, but in my chair at my desk, and work on my dissertation. I didn't write for those full 2 hours every day. There were plenty of days, and this was also part of her advice, I didn't have to write for that entire time, but I had to be butt in my chair at my desk working on my project. Even if I spent those 2 hours reviewing my notes, editing something I'd already written, rereading one of my sources to get a better understanding of something, I still had to be working on my dissertation every day for 2 hours. And I did that for almost, I think it was about 9 months total. I think I started in June of 2017 and I was done with it. I defended by April of 2018. So I needed a good writing habit, and your writing routine is what helps you create that habit. So having a designated space to work, sitting down at roughly the same time, like knowing what time of day worked best for me and sitting down at that same time almost every day, having my desk set up how I wanted it, having a candle, something nice, a good playlist to listen to. Those are all things, if you've been watching my vlogs as I've been doing my novels, you see me do this. I've got the whole setup. I've got my external monitor, I've got a candle for each project, I've got my external keyboard that I now do all of my writing on. I don't usually do a whole lot of writing directly on my laptop keyboard anymore. I like having the external keyboard, my laptop kind of off to the side. Working in Scrivener and setting goals in Scrivener, that's something you see me do all the time for every novel since I've started publishing them. You see me set up my Scrivener for that. All of that started with my PhD dissertation. That was when I first downloaded Scrivener. That was where I learned all of these features. The first Scrivener video I ever made on this channel was how to use Scrivener as an academic. This is all things that I've also given advice on, and this is all the same advice I've given for creative writing. It all started as an academic writer. It all transferred over. And then by creating those good habits and that good routine, that's what then gradually over time builds consistency and discipline, being able to sit down and work on that project on a daily/weekly basis. So now the advice that I give, especially if you're someone who's doing writing on the side and it's a hobby, it's something you do for fun, it's not your main full-time job, then it doesn't have to be an everyday writing habit, but still deciding these are the days in the week that I can do. I can do every Saturday and Sunday, or I can do Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, but Wednesday I just can't manage because my kids have soccer practice or dance lessons, or I work late in the office on Wednesdays, or I work late in the office on Fridays, or Friday I go out and I have fun with my friends after work. There are going to be certain days where you just can't do it, and that's fine. Even if you can only write for 1 hour on Saturdays, it's still valid, and that's still something that you deserve to be able to focus on, but you want to then make that a non-negotiable. Okay, every Saturday when I have an hour to myself in the morning. That's my time to write. So creating that sense of consistency and discipline and treating it seriously, even if it is just a hobby, is really important. And that's something that I got from the discipline it took as an academic writer. So I think that's something that, as an academic writer transitioning over to creative writing, that's something that has worked really well for me, because I already had an understanding of that sense of discipline and consistency and saw how that helped me get my PhD written in less than a year, when a lot of people take 2 years. My own program was designed for 2 years of coursework, 1 year of working on your portfolio and your comp exam, and 2 years to write your dissertation. I took 2 years for coursework, 2 years for my portfolio and comp exam, and I had 1 year left of my TA funding to finish my dissertation. And not finishing within that year was not an option for me. And thank God I had an advisor who understood that and supported that and agreed to help me get done in that year. I was also lucky with my topic that I didn't depend on archive research and things like that. There are things external to your own process that can slow you down, but I also just had the discipline and the consistency to get it done. There's a few things that are negative traits or potential roadblocks in both. And if you struggle with these things in one type of writing, they will impact you if you then transition into another type of writing. And so these were habits I had to be very, very, very careful of as I transitioned from academic writing into creative writing. So perfectionism is a problem no matter what. Like, perfectionism is, as they say, perfectionism is the enemy of good. Perfectionism is something that any writer, whether creative or academic, anyone doing any kind of writing is going to struggle with perfectionism. Procrastination is something that's really easy to fall into, and is something that I had to be very, very, very careful of as both an academic writer, but also now as a creative writer. I feel like it's an even bigger threat for me as a creative writer, because I set my deadlines, I set my schedule, I decide when I want to publish something. I could just say, you know what, I don't have to publish Independent Hearts 4 by later this year. I could publish it sometime next year. You know what will happen if I do that? I'm not going to get it done. I always set a fairly ambitious deadline, and if it has to get pushed back, it can. But then I do beat myself up if I push it back too far, or if I have to push it back too many times. But procrastination is a real threat. And typically both perfectionism and procrastination are also impacted by burnout. So with both types of writing, you do run the risk of dealing with the negative effects of burnout. Perfectionism can then lead to burnout, and burnout can lead to procrastination, and then you get stuck in this vicious cycle. So you want to make sure that your routines and your habits are realistic so that they are then sustainable and you can do that. So like while I was doing my PhD, 2 hours a day, Monday through Friday, that was realistic. If I tried to tell myself you have to be butt in chair at the desk working on your dissertation for 7 hours a day, 6 or 7 days a week, I would have burned out and I would not have finished on time. But by setting a goal that was realistic, it got the job done, and I was still burned out, but not as burned out as if I tried to do even more. So you really need to be careful of those things. And then criticism. I feel like criticism is something that you're going to deal with in both types of writing, because ultimately, unless you are doing something purely for yourself, most types of writing are going to be read by someone else. Whether it's a school paper and your teacher's reading it to grade it, or it's an academic article or book that you're publishing for other people in your field to read, they're going to critique it. If you're writing a novel or short stories or something like that, then you're going to have an audience that's reading your creative work. They're going to be leaving reviews and feedback. Being able to handle that criticism is really, really important, and something that both types of writing are going to deal with. I do feel that by starting in academic writing and then moving into creative writing, that going that direction worked pretty well. I think it can work well going in the other direction, going from creative writing into academic writing, if you've already had creative writing that has been published and available to the public to read. As an academic writer first, I feel like a big part of my training was understanding that other people are going to read and criticize my work, that I'm not putting out something just to be read and enjoyed. I'm putting out something that is going to be read for how it then fits in with what that other scholar is doing. And so they're going to read it for the purpose of, yes, Andrea's work is really good and it helps back up my own theories, or no, Andrea's work is really bad and shows what's wrong with this particular type of conversation in this field. But either way, they're reading it for how they can use it for their own research. And so being able to, as I was writing, anticipate what readers are going to think and what questions they might have so that I can answer those questions in my writing, what critique they might have so I can try to balance it out. So why a lot of academic writing is phrasing like, while some argue X, I am arguing Y because of ABC reasons. Or it could be argued this way, but I am arguing it this way. Or some common criticisms of this topic are ABC, but I am advocating for an XYZ perspective. You're writing that way so that you can cut off some of that criticism, so that they can't then say you're not aware of these things because you are addressing them. So in creative writing, it's a little bit harder to do that. You can't use that explicit language, but I will stop and think, what might my readers think about this scene? What might some of the reviews be? Are they going to say that this lines up with what they expect from the genre? Or are they going to say, I went a completely different direction and it was not what they were expecting in the worst way possible and it ruined their experience of reading it? There are a lot of decisions and choices I can make as a creative writer in my novels. A lot of them would really disappoint my readers, so I don't make those choices. I make the better choices that are more in line with what my readers are expecting. And so it's kind of a case of not wanting to be predictable in either types of writing, but still making sure that you're delivering ultimately what the reader is expecting. So as someone who also self-edits my novels, I think this is something where my academic training has come in handy, and I've talked about this in previous vlogs where I've talked about my editing process. You'll hear a lot of people in the creative writing space say, you can't edit your own novels, never edit your own novels, always hire an editor. A lot of those people also offer editing services, so I question that advice just a little bit. But I do think for some creative writers, it is hard to edit their work. Self-editing does require a certain amount of introspection, reflection, and self-awareness that can be really difficult. It also requires a certain amount of distance from your writing, which can be difficult. It's why creative writing has the phrase kill your darlings, meaning to cut words from your manuscript. Every word a fiction writer writes is our little darlings, and we can be very precious and protective about every word we write, but we have to be willing to cut things for the sake of the story. And that's why I love the quote, I think it's Terry Pratchett, who says, writing the first draft is telling yourself the story. The first draft, I can do whatever I want because I'm just telling myself the story. But as I'm editing the second draft, the third draft, that is where I'm then crafting that story into something the reader will like. And so what I like and what I think is special about the book and what I just get the warm and fuzzies over a certain scene or a certain line of dialogue, if it ultimately is not fitting the genre, it has to go. And it's the same thing with academic writing. You might think that this is the most brilliant idea you've ever had, but you have to be able to have that distance to think, is this what others in the field are going to respond to? As an academic writer, I feel like I was already trained to think that everything I write is shit that nothing I write is good enough, that everything I write needs to be completely scrapped and completely rewritten. That has actually served me pretty well as a fiction writer, because I don't get that precious about my own work. And if my alpha readers or beta readers are like, yeah, this doesn't make sense, I'm not understanding the scene, or I don't understand this decision that the character has made, or this moment just feels like it's falling flat, even if I see it differently, I have to go by what they're saying, and I have to be willing to make that change, even if it hurts to do it. So I feel like as an academic writer first, it's really helped having that more critical mindset and being able to look at a manuscript from a more critical and judgmental perspective. I can look at my writing, and I will always be my harshest critic, because I am looking at it from that same very strict, very harsh academic criticism, judgment perspective. And I'm comparing my writing against the best writing I have ever read from the most experienced, award-winning writers I have ever read. That's the standard I'm holding my writing to. And my writing is never going to measure up to that standard, right? I can't truly compare my writing to someone who is writing in different genres than I am, who are winning awards, who have made millions of dollars, or whatever judgment of success or measurement of success we're looking at. I can't compare myself to someone who's been writing for 15, 20, 30 years and has so much more experience than me. But by aiming for that, I know that I'm still making my writing the best it can possibly be. And my own personal struggle is definitely that it's hard for me to settle for good enough. If I think it can be better, I will push it to be better. And so there is always a point during the editing process where I have to admit I need to just finish it. My first novel, A Brave Start, I could write a much better story if I was writing that story now, because I've got now several books of experience under my belt. I've written so much more. It's why every book I write, I feel is better than the previous one. And so like if you were to start with one of my more recent books and then go back to the beginning, you probably would feel like it's not as good. So like with my Across the Pond series, the most recent one, Forever Love London, is kind of on its own. So you can read that one first. That's Celeste. You can read Celeste's story first and then go back and read Eleanor's 3 books. But fair warning, if you do that, I think, people who've read them can disagree with me in the comments, but I think Forever Love London is a much stronger book, at least technically, than A Brave Start is. And so you are going to notice that as you read both of those books. So like I can't compare myself to people who have so much more experience than I do, but I still do that. I just have gotten better at learning when to kind of cut that off and just acknowledge the book is as done as I can make it, bearing in mind that I need to finish it to publish it this year. So if I told myself, well, I'll just publish it whenever it's done, it will never be done. And this is another thing I have to tell my students. Nothing is ever perfect, it's just due. No novel you write is ever going to be perfect. You just kind of need to publish it at a certain point. Because especially if it's your first novel, your second novel, you will never improve it. You will never improve your writing until you finish a novel, publish it, see what the audience thinks. And then each book you write, you get better and better and better. You can't just keep editing a new version of the same novel. It doesn't work that way. So yeah, criticism is definitely something you have to be aware of and make sure that whether it's self-criticism or criticism you're taking in from other people, that you're both anticipating what criticism you might get while you're going through the editing process. I would say the writing process as well, but really it's mostly the editing process is where anticipating criticism is important. If you're anticipating criticism and responding to anticipated criticism while you're writing, you're never going to get the first draft finished. So the first draft is truly just for yourself, whether that's academic writing or fiction writing. But yeah, understanding criticism, understanding how criticism functions within the writing and editing process, as well as within the publishing process, is really important and something that will help you regardless of whether you do academic or creative writing. So ultimately, I do think that having my PhD and doing that first made a huge difference on my creative writing. I was doing some creative writing while I was doing my grad school work. I wrote my first novel, which has still not been published. I wrote that after my first master's, but before my second master's, and then A Brave Start, which was the first novel that I published. I started writing that during my second master's and throughout that master's degree and throughout my PhD, and then I published it a year after, a year and a half after I finished my PhD. So I do think my background in academic writing has really served me as a fiction writer, but I also think that if you have done a lot of creative writing and you are now going into a situation where you need to do some academic writing, there's a lot of skills in each that transfer and overlap and will help you no matter what kind of writing you're doing. So this has been a bit of a long ramble. I hope it's still been interesting. Hopefully I've edited it down into something a little bit more concise, but we know I love to ramble and chat, so I hope you've enjoyed this. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you're not subscribed. There'll be more of these types of videos, as well as more cozy vlogs coming very soon. Say hi in the comments. Let me know how you're doing. Let me know what experience you have. Have you done a lot of creative writing? Have you done a lot of academic writing? Do you do a bit of both now? What experience do you have with either of these types of writing? I would really like to know. Any advice or skill transfer from one to the other that I haven't covered that you want to add, let us know in the comments. And then you can leave me some writing related emojis in the comments to let me know which one of you lovely people have made it all the way to the end of this video. And I'm gonna go now, but I will see you all very soon in the next vlog. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I'll see you later. Bye!